My name's Patrick O'Brien. Director of Sales here at CyberSaint. Been with the company for about 5 years, so excited to be leading this session along with Bob Blythe. We'll be talking about building your cyber risk management scorecard, a guide to evaluating platforms, which I've had the privilege of working with Bob on a little bit. Bob, why don't I pass it to you for an introduction, and then we'll jump into it.
Sure, Patrick, thanks for having me. My name is Bob Blythe. I am currently a principal security consultant for New Era Technology. I provide vCISO and GRC compliance advisory services. And prior to that, I worked for a large entertainment company as the Vice President of Information Security, Governance, Risk, and Compliance, and about 35 years in the industry.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Bob. So I wanted to start off, I know we're going to kind of get into, choosing between an RFI, RFP, how to build that out, what kind of criteria to look at. But maybe just to kick things off, Bob, what have you seen? I know you've gone through this a couple of times, in your roles. What have you seen that kind of causes this to come up from an organizational standpoint in terms of, an RFP project or just bringing in, a GRC solution?
Sure. So there is two schools of thought. You can still obtain your goals and objectives of obtaining the information from the vendors that you've selected through an RFP, a request for proposal. But I find those are kind of geared toward, enough about the platform, enough about what you're trying to accomplish, enough about the vendors where you want to really compare pricing. However, on an RFI side, it's not really geared toward pricing. It's actually geared to understanding the platform, understanding the vendor, understanding the market. So I typically like to start with an RFI. Back in the day, when you were doing phone system purchases, you would go with an RFP because a phone system back in the day was a phone system.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, exactly. So these days, an RFI is really a good way to go because you can structure all your questions. You can understand the vendors, you can understand their position in the market, and you can give them a series of questions to answer to get a really good understanding of what they do and who they are. Yeah.
And I feel like that's especially important in the GRC market because there's a lot of different players with different angles and, it's not like a phone system, right?
Yep, there's a lot of players that have been in the market for a long time. There's a lot of players that are just getting into the market, and the market is a bit saturated. So you want to make sure you pick the right vendor for your GRC program.
Absolutely. Yeah, so kind of going, from the RFP versus RFI, let's kind of turn to the RFI use case here, being something you're a little more familiar with. So, turning to building that, how are you, when you're going through that process, Bob, balancing, the program's unique components that you might be facing at, New Era or, the entertainment company that you were at versus those more table stakes features that need to be met as a cyber-based GRC solution?
Sure. So I think that the first thing is to really understand your business drivers. You can say, oh, we need a GRC platform, or we need to assess against a current framework, or we have compliance requirements. It's really good to first start with your business drivers and then move into your functional requirements. Typically, you can start with a high-level demo of vendors that you selected, and you can look at Gartner and the other publications, say who's kind of the market leaders, and kind of go from there. You can ask peers, you can talk to other individuals in the industry, see what they're using, see if they're happy with it, the pros and cons. But again, getting the business drivers and functional requirements, which is for a GRC platform, is extremely key. Really understanding what you want to get out of the product, how you're going to get out of the platform, how you're going to manage it, what you're going to look for from executive dashboarding and reporting and KPIs, and really look at it holistically of what you want to try to accomplish. I mean, what's your goal? Do you want to move off of spreadsheets and get into an automated platform? Are you just venturing into providing, in our case, providing customers with meeting their compliance requirements, whether it be around a particular framework or let's say a privacy standard. You really got to take a look at it and say, what are you trying to accomplish? You start there. That's the first thing.
And so it sounds like you're a little more focused on that program's unique components and then kind of tailor that into, what does that GRC product provide? If it's a compliance use case, you got to make sure that compliance framework's going to be in there to start, right?
Agreed. So you want to find a platform, an organization that has a full breadth of not only the authoritative frameworks, but also the control families. And that could be NIST, that could be CIS, CSC's top 18 or version 8. It could be the Australian, essentially, if you're doing business in Australia. So it's really important to understand the depth and size of what the platform can do from a framework perspective. Now, with that said, if you're an organization that has a very specific need, you want to make sure that they have the mechanisms in place to be able to manage your GRC program. So that's really important, and there's little technical functional, like, single sign-on, capability for security, role-based administration. So those are more the technical bits and bytes, but you really want to start with your foundation of what you're trying to accomplish and then what meets your business needs. Then you go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think about some of the more technical aspects. You mentioned single sign-on. I go through this with a lot of customers from an admin perspective. That's a little bit more of the phone system use case where it's like, hey, these are functional areas you need to have, right? But I think you bring up a good point in, when you're getting into your program's requirements and start looking at, I know one of the reasons why we've worked together is the Essential 8 framework was a big use case for you working in Australia, understanding kind of those more not niche, but detailed requirements for making your program successful. And as you're going through that, review process when you're going, into the RFI, what have you found to make you confident in the experience? Whether that's a white glove experience or maybe it's just that the product is so easy to use that, you're able to really understand what it's delivering without the white glove. What have you found when you're going through the RFI process that supports the solution that you're selecting?
Yeah, so and I think we provide a accompanying RFI document as part of a resource. But again, you're looking across the board. You may not know a lot about what a GRC platform should do. So you're going to get a lot of the marketing material that's out there. You're going to get everybody that can hang a shingle on the wall saying, "Hey, we provide GRC services." You really, again, you want to actually start thinking about when you understand your business drivers and your functional cars, start developing your questions. Like, what do you want to get out of it? Obviously, you want to know about the company, and you want to make sure that that company is fully transparent. It may not give you all your financial information, but what vectors do they play in? What markets are they playing? They have a customer list can they share and see if there's any commonalities, like, oh, well, they do exactly what we do, so if they're using it, maybe it's worth its weight in gold. But then again, you get those questions about company overview. Give an overview of the product. What does the product do? Is it SaaS based? Do I have to have agents loaded? Really kind of understand what the potential level of effort to deploy a GRC platform requires. Then you can get into those really in-depth functional requirements. For example, for us, for New Era, we had to support multiple clients across the world. And that would include domestic, international. Obviously, international, they're looking at the ISO. While you look at the United States, the combination of ISO and NIST. But then we have mid-sized market clients that require just the CIS top 18 or the CIS version 8. They're just kind of starting out in their journey around governance, risk, and compliance with that cybersecurity component layered on top of it. Then you can roll into other areas of, like, specifically which frameworks can be supported, how it's supported. And again, those really kind of in-depth, rich feature sets that kind of separate the vendors from each other. For us, executive dashboarding was extremely important. Then you should also look at the security. So as with all GRC platforms, when going through an assessment or an audit, you need to obtain artifacts and evidence to validate that the control is in place. Where is that stored and how secure it is? So during the RFI process, it's really good at that time to ask those third-party vendor risk questions of like, how are you securing my data? And of course, the last piece, which I think Cyber Saint really shines, is that white glove treatment and knowledge of the GRC environment and vector, as well as understanding their platform in detail. I get a little turned off when I get I would call it a dog and pony, where there's kind of running through it like, yeah, I'm going to do another demo. We want to have a conversation with the vendor and see how knowledgeable they are and see how far they will go from, the extra mile. Like they're gonna have the conversations. They're gonna follow up with us. They're gonna have follow up. We're gonna follow up questions that they're gonna answer for us and really be engaged and build that partnership, because it is a long-term partnership, right, Pat? You're
Yeah.
looking at, you're not gonna do a 1-year annual. You might do that in the first year, but you're gonna do a 3-year. I mean, you're kind of married to that vendor for 3 years. You want to make sure you're getting everything that they promised.
Yeah, it's absolutely a commitment when you start deploying a GRC solution. You brought up a couple things that I wanted to dig into a little bit, Bob. So you mentioned customers and the vectors that they're working with through your RFI process. And I don't know that we ever talked about this, but would you reach out to customers or just look for some examples and use cases that you could align to?
Yeah, I mean, if the vendor, and usually the vendor they have the use cases, they're published on their website. But speaking with the references, so minimum 3 references, right? I think for every vendor you want a minimum of 3 references. Of course, they're going to give you references that are going to speak highly of them, but that conversation is between you and the reference, where you can say, hey, we're in this particular vertical or vector, you're in particular, how is it working for you? How do you use it? And I've been a reference for multiple vendors, and I open up the Komodo and I say, yep, really great product. Kind of wish it did this, but I got over it.
Yeah.
But it's good to understand how people are using it operationally on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing I wanted to dig into from your experience with RFIs, and probably more as you get into the evaluation period, what does it mean to you to have different folks from that vendor involved in that process?
Very, very important.
Yeah. And what I mean by that is, I mean, I'll just talk from my personal experience. I always try to use the resources that I can, and probably some of my team is sick of me calling on them and saying, hey, I need you on this call. But, what does that mean to you to have maybe the chief product officer come on and talk about the roadmap, and, different folks talk about different aspects of the company?
It tells me that the vendor's serious about me being a client. That's what it tells me. When you bring some of the executives in, so we can have that peer-to-peer conversation. When you bring your technical and your customer success individuals on early, so we kind of know what the onboarding is going to feel like, because you can sign an agreement. The onboarding process or journey or experience may not be that great. So you want to be able to get all of that up front. You want to make sure that you feel comfortable, because you're probably pitching this to senior management and you're asking them to spend money.
Yep.
And they say, well, why do I need a GRC tool? You can explain why, and but I think that, to your point of getting people engaged from the team, not just the sales executive, even though the sales executives are phenomenal, but if you have some tough technical questions, the resource or the subject matter experts there to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up another point that I'd be interested to dig into a little bit in terms of selling this yourself, right, upstairs. And I imagine that RFI process and mentioning that you've met with executives at the company, you've met the customer success team. I mean, that must make it so much easier for you, right, when you're, selling that upstairs.
You demonstrate due diligence by doing that, by doing the process. Now, again, I've had experience over many years where some vendors will say, well, we're not gonna do the RFI process. We're not gonna do the RFP process because we find that we put a lot of energy in it and we don't get selected anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
Now you literally fall out of the running when you do that.
Yeah.
And if you keep the RFI process very simple, like, hey, just yes and no, and give the vendor the capability of attaching additional marketing material or use cases or providing some color around their answer, that's good, because then the vendor can take it as far as they want to take it, and they can take the extra time. And again, when you see that, you know that that vendor is very interested in supporting your initiative. They're very interested in you becoming a client. So you get a really good feeling like, I'm not just hiring a vendor, I'm building a partnership. Because
Hmm.
again, it's going to be the long haul. When you develop and implement your GRC program, it's not there for a year, it's there forever. And then you mature it over time. So it's important to have the right partner.
Absolutely. And I like how you brought up, bringing in customer success. I think that's a really important aspect of the RFI. So as we move into that implementation kind of aspect of, once you've selected the vendor, and begun implementing the solution, what from your experience, what are some maybe cornerstone examples of that successful implementation? What are you looking for in that
Yeah,
experience?
so we'll start with, obviously you're going to get down to your two or three runners, so you're not looking at five vendors. You might do five vendors out of the gate, but you're looking for get to that fine list. Now, in the beginning, you did a very high level demo. Now you have a lot more, and again, I want to call it ammunition to with the
Hmm.
vendor say, hey, you said you do this, demonstrate it to me and see how smoothly that demonstration goes. If
Yep.
they're mucking around in their sandbox and say, oh, this is not really configured for that. Well, you knew that going in. So again, going to that second piece of having the vendors demonstrate what they say the platform can do is important.
Yep.
And then once you do that, then you'll be able to get to that finalist. And you bring in your other stakeholders. Now, combination, different schools, you can have a committee, a steering committee where you have your 4 or 5 stakeholders involved, from the very beginning. That's not a bad approach because you have different opinions and different point of views. But you can also go through this and get down to the finals and then bring your committee in to do that final decision. And once that
Hmm.
final decision is done, then you're talking about licensing, cost, and all that. But you kind of ironed out everything that you want in a platform and in a partner.
Awesome. Yeah. And you know, one piece of that, as you're moving through that evaluation and getting into that implementation, one thing I kind of want to dig into because I'm just curious, Bob, is do you find that through that evaluation period I know that you've deployed a lot of softwares, a lot of different products. Have you found that what you feel like is promised in the evaluation is very different from the implementation? Or do you find it's usually pretty aligned? You find it to be pretty successful generally with the products you've selected when you get into that implementation phase?
I would say 9 times out of 10, by the methodology and process that I just explained,
Yeah.
you're going to have a successful implementation.
Yeah.
But that other 1%, yeah, it looked good. Then you're in the
Yeah.
operations part, and it's like it's not working, and then you're calling in. They're like, oh, well, that's a bug or that's a future component that we're going to add to the platform. It's like, well, wait a minute, we talked about this. So again, it does take a level of effort, but the effort will not be wasted.
Yeah.
And from a senior management perspective, you can confidently go to them. Like in my former roles, my team would come to me and say, hey, Bob, we need this new cybersecurity technology. And I'm like, do your homework, do your legwork. You come to me, I'm going to hit you with some tough questions. If you have the answer, you're making me feel very confident you did your due diligence and that you're selecting the correct partner and the correct vendor, platform, et cetera, for my organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what everybody's trying to avoid, right, is that 1 out of 10, and making sure that, you're not, I know from the sales side, I'll be honest, people can do a lot, right? With a demo environment, you can display things in a way. So how do you kind of look out for that, Bob? Like, is there any examples that you found that could cause failure in implementation that, practitioners should watch out for when they're going through this process?
I would say don't shy away from doing your due diligence. So, the vendor is going to give you full access to a demo environment.
Hmm.
You don't have to put, if for us, providing the service to our clients, we wouldn't ever take any true data and put it in there. But want to walk through the workflow and the process and say, hey, does it, they've demoed it to us. They say it does it, but you really don't know until you start playing with the platform. Then once you start getting into it, it's like, okay, it is as intuitive as they say it was. But do some mock assessments, bring in some mock data, not production data, but mock data, and see how it works. And if it generates the reports, and if the workflow and the grading and the scoring works as stated, then you've done your due diligence. And so I think you can feel very comfortable. Now, with that said, something that CyberSync does very good is even after the sell, you guys are there. I mean, we're almost like married in sense where, it's like you guys aren't done with us yet. And I know we had multiple sessions, even though I knew the platform from prior, you did multiple sessions to bring my team up to speed on this is how it works. Let's run through it. And again, they can ask questions like, oh, I remember you showed this and I kind of played with it, but can you show it to me again? And again, if it works really well, then you're picking the right solution.
Yeah. And especially with the updates, I mean, I think that marriage is so important because even I'm learning new ways to use the product, every couple of weeks when we do a development release. So yeah, I think one question I want to ask you before we drop here, Bob, I know we got a couple more minutes. If you think about just maybe weighing a couple of areas, right? So you've got, I think, product capabilities, you've got kind of the service level, maybe company in general, some of those customer use cases. How would you weigh like what is the most important criteria for you? Maybe just a stack rank of, your kind of top three that you're looking out for to make sure that it's going to be successful.
Well, you want a market leader, someone that's been around the block, someone that knows their stuff. Um, you want the products and features. So, not only understanding that the company or vendors is financially stable, they're not going away anytime soon. Products and features are important. Again, meeting your business drivers and your functional requirements, check those boxes off, do your security. But I would say it's really comes down to the relationship and level of support. Now, the level of support is not after the sale, it is part of the sale. So it's from the introduction all the way through the RFI into the onboarding of your platform and actually using it. And then after that, what's the service like? Now, with that said, in your RFI, you should have the vendor explain exactly how they provide service. You're forcing the vendor to put it down on paper. You're forcing them to document it. So there's no misunderstanding of like, oh, I stated this, our service level is not really there. So, what's the SLAs? And because don't forget, this is all going to be embedded into your agreement with the vendor. Your security requirements, your addendum for protecting your data is going to be added into the agreement. So you have to have those guardrails in place as well. And again, understanding the level of support that you're going to get. And again, it has to meet your business drivers, your functional requirements, and your future functional requirements. So as you start using the platform, you're going to find new ways of doing things. As we did in my prior role.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd like to open it up to questions if anyone has any here. Give everybody a couple seconds to ask any questions if there are any. Otherwise, Bob, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I guess I would just say I continue to appreciate the relationship that we have, Patrick, and the support that you provided in my past organization, as well as the organization I'm in now.
Likewise. Well, doesn't look like we have any questions, so thank you everyone for joining, and hope you enjoy the rest of the Stronger conference.